Hello and welcome to In the Light Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel, and my guest today is Judith-Kate Friedman. Hello, Judith-Kate.
Hi, good to
Hello.
be.
I've asked you here because of this rather fascinating and wonderful book, The Other Within, the genius of deformity in myth, culture, and psyche. But it is not your book. So that's a twist. We normally have people talking about their own books. Tell us more.
Well, it has been given to me to be the steward of this third edition, this beautiful expanded third edition of this book by my beloved Daniel Deardorff, who was a myth singer, mythologist, started out as a composer of music and a performer in the pop rock scene of the 70s, turned into a record producer, then a teacher of mythology, then an author. And we were together for the last 13, almost 14 years of his life. And when he passed in 2019, on 9/19/19, a great day, I think, for a trickster to fly from this world onto, as I said at the time, out of this story into the next. Part of his next story is what happens with his beautiful legacy and some of the things he was just on the cusp of teaching more widely when he became unable to do it himself. So I've been very, very grateful, honored, and pleased to be able to carry his work forward along with my own work as a singer and songwriter and producer and curator. It's just sort of like it's sort of weaved in. The way that we met is now the way that after his exit, we're still collaborating through the arts. And so I have not been a published author before. I've been a writer since childhood. But I've also now become the narrator of the audiobook, which will hopefully come out next year. And so I've been deep inside of this particular set of words, which is this book. And I've also studied mythology recently in the UK in order to prepare for this journey with Martin Shaw at the Dartington Art School and the poetics of imagination. So I think we'll get into a lot of that together. But soul journeys brought Daniel and I together. They continue, and they're bringing you and I and your audience together. So I'm so glad to be here.
How beautiful. I it's such a wonderful poetic way in which you've described it. So I'm very, very interested in talking with you about this inner world of imagination. And in the book, actually, at one point, there is a contrast that is described between the civilized world and the inner world. And it's something that I am acutely aware of. But it would be nice for you to, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, and I'd love to have a conversation about it too and hear how your perspective is. Because one thing that Daniel was so much a teacher through images. When he taught about myth, he taught about the importance of image and how a myth teller will make sure they're moving like stepping stones in a brook from image to image. Right? And this is how we remember. And this is how the memory gets into us viscerally. And so it's not only imagination like from the front of our brain, it's the deep image of story and how it blooms forward. So the please ask me your question again. I just spun off. It's
Well,
still early for me on my Pacific Coast time. Please go ahead.
well, I was actually just thinking about the contrast between what we consider to be civilized and this inner world, which is so very rich.
Yes. So in your bringing it that way, I see Alexander's Wall, which is of the 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great, who was really the first foister of imperialism, separation from the wild, onto what became known as civilization in that way in the Western world. And Daniel used that great wall. He said it split the human heart. That as soon as civilization came and the wild was exiled, we then had the inside and the outside. What's really interesting in the way you brought up the question is the pairing, and it's very tricksterish here, of the inside, which is paired still with the outside wild, so that part of us, which is still wild, which is still other, which is still alive, which is deep inside. I hear you asking about that, right? And that is living often, because we're all in civilizations, inside the walls. And yet we also have the earth in crisis right now in a way that it behooves us to be also paying attention to his other piece of that metaphor, which is the actual physicality of humans and the wild. So it's both and.
So many of my regular viewers will know that my regular viewers will know that I am also an astrologer as well as an analytical hypnotherapist. So story and myth are an extremely important part of my work on many different levels. And it was only last week that I was giving a talk for an astrological group in Brighton, in which I was talking precisely about this dichotomy that you're talking about, because of the image of the centaur, half horse, half man. And it is that connection to the wild, and the myth is the myth of Chiron that I was talking about, because that is very much about this separation from what is wild inside us, wild outside us, by virtue of the constraints of logic and civilization. So that's, I think, a very important understanding to have, is that there is this duality within us. And what we want to do is understand more about the role of myth. So in your mind, what is the role of myth?
In my own mind, the role of myth is a deep reawakening, a path to a deep reawakening of a deeper truth. In Daniel's words, he would say, a myth is a story that tells a sacred truth without the use of facts. And this idea that there is a deeper truth is, I think, essential to healing, to well-being, to peacemaking, to everything that's important about the vitality of life being honored and people being able to be together now and going forward. Yeah.
And it's so important, this idea that myth holds an inner truth, because this is about the heart, and it's about the imagination, and the link between heart and imagination that lies deep within us. And the reason that myth is so powerful is because it has these archetypes of human experience that are within it, which we respond to because we recognize them. So one of these archetypes is the subject of this book, and it's the archetype of the other. Tell us about that.
Well, I'd like to rewind for a second before that, like a little prelude, in the same way that Daniel would give a prelude before he would get into a myth telling. Just grabbing my notes here. And so, because this is not from the book, but I want to quote something that he said that I often now quote in the book talks that I give. He says, why we need to hear the old stories. Why we need to hear the old stories, he would say, is something we say every time. The difference between these old stories and a story that someone makes up is that a story made up by an individual, although it draws upon the hearts and minds of many others, is not the same as a story that's made by an entire people. by generations of people. A story like that is like groundwater that's absorbed through the earth and cleansed and purified, so that the images are distilled and they survive centuries, even millennia, because they're so strong for us. A story like that is a storehouse of wisdom. In modern civilization, this is Daniel speaking, we are like a child that was taken from its family so that we don't remember. And we're given into the hands of strangers. And the stranger is the modern culture. And so we don't know where we came from, and we don't know our birth mother, who is the earth. As Sean Kane, author of The Wisdom of the Myth Tellers, has it, the myths are the voice of the earth speaking through people, telling them who they are. And imagine people who look and look and look to find out who their parents really were, who their mother really was. And imagine finding a chest full of stories and songs that your mother told you before you could remember. And that's what these stories are. These are the stories that our mother used to tell us. Is it clear?
I love that. And I think that's a beautiful prelude, as you say. And we do have these connections with stories. There's so much about stories being refashioned, remodeled, and it feels very artificial at the moment with so many fairy tales that have been changed and adapted to suit a particular way of thinking that's wanting to filter into the consciousness of children. And whatever the intentions are behind that, I think very often there is a deep misunderstanding of the original folk story, which leads to the desire to change it in some way, to make it more palatable to whoever it is that has deemed it unpalatable. And the core is gone. The wisdom is gone because it is not understood. So I think this is very, very powerful, what you've just read.
What, may I just say something to what you just said? You're pointing out the exact crux of the problem. You know, it's almost, you could call it whitewashing, or it's censorship, or it's a lot of different kinds of things. It started happening even way back in some of the tales that I thought were fairy tales at first. And then I learned, oh, those are allegories. They have a Christian morality built into them. They have this perspective. They have that perspective, you know, that. And so you have to go further back to those old stories to find what you're talking about in terms of the deep wisdom that was a way that people learned how to live. This is really, you know, that this is, some indigenous folks would talk about the original instructions. They are carried in the stories a lot. They're also carried in the songs and the dances and the different ritual practices. But they are handed down often in this wholeness. And what I hear you saying is a lot about the one-sidedness, the refashioning of it for a particular purpose or point of view, the taking of control. You could even say the appropriating or co-opting of these stories to fashion them for a given point in time. It is happening a lot now. I come from a country that is battling censorship madly, right? Compared to how it might have been more covert. It's now exceedingly overt and trending, unfortunately. You know, so there are ways in which that seeking of control is afoot, you know, in our world very intensively against stories. It's very interesting because previously, I think stories still got to slip under the radar, and now stories and voicing the stories is also under attack. So
It's
why is that?
it's very much under attack because actually it's what is happening is the weaponizing of stories. And the reason that stories are being weaponized, and when I say stories, I mean things that are a deep part of our cultures. And the reason that stories are being weaponized is because they are powerful. And
Yes,
and
exactly.
and it's we can dismiss things and say, oh, it's only a story. But clearly, it is not only a story. And what we're talking about is the ancient canon of stories that make up our culture and the culture of others also. So, the very essence of them, the power of them, is the very reason why they are being used and rewritten with a direct purpose. We could argue it's always been this way. That's always
Well, I
happened.
was going to say, I don't want to argue, but the beginning of the misuse, Daniel had this as a pet peeve, but as like the misuse of the word myth to mean a falsehood, that actually goes all the way back to Aristotle. And that was a competition moment in that history of like, is civilization going to win over and dictate what is real? Or is this old stuff still going to be given its reign as being alive? And so the battle of this kind in different forms, at least in Western cultures, has been going on for millennia. What
It's
I
certain.
want to add is that, and this is where the other comes in to bring it back into your original question. What Daniel was very interested in was to kind of shine a light on, but also shine shadow on, if you can shine shadow, but like to make sure that we honor the dark as well as the light, because we're looking at paradox. And what the old stories have, and what trickster tales have even more than some of the other old stories, but they all have some element of holding paradox. This is what a myth also teaches us by its very existence. And when you have the one-sidedness take over with a moralistic flavor, then it could come from the communists, it could come from the conservative right wing, it could come from wherever it comes from. It is one-sidedness is the problem. So where Daniel really speaks to inclusion and the well-being and the repair of the heart, which is also going to be the repair of our whole way of being in the world and being alive at this point in time going forward, that in my feeling of it, is that we need to hold paradox, and that we actually, as human beings, were created. He would talk about the mandorla image. Are you familiar with this? So your listeners and viewers may not be. So the mandorla, I usually wear one, but I couldn't find it in time for our thing. So you just have to picture this: a circle, which is the below, a circle, which is the above, and the overlapping of the two, like a Venn diagram, right? So this symbol also exists in Christianity later because it was taken and used, but it is pre-Christian. It is an ancient symbol of two worlds meeting, and in the overlap where is sometimes looked at as the seat of the soul. In Norse mythology, looking at the world tree, or any other mythologies that have the world tree, but I'm going to speak of the Norse tree, Yggdrasil was the name of the tree. There's a serpent in the roots. There's an eagle or condor in the heights. Other cultures, it's a thunderbird. And there in the middle is the tree, right? And there is a creature, a mammal, the limbic system. It could be looked at as if you have the reptilian and then the executive function. And now you have this mammal, this squirrel named Ratatoskr, which means drill tooth. And his job, or its job, their job, is to run up and down the tree, delivering the messages, which are hurled as insults from the above to the below, which is very interesting and not something I can get into right now. Danny could talk about it perhaps more if he were here. But the job of us as humans are, we're like Ratatoskr on the tree. We're here in the middle space. So we are already inside a mandorla by being between heaven and earth. So what does that mean? For our responsibility, for our generativity, for our creativity, for our connectivity. This is a lot of why he was drawn to, and also from personal experience, which we can speak of later, but Daniel Deardorff was drawn to looking at not the hero's journey in a Joseph Campbell way, or, those, though he is certainly in the lineage of studying Campbell and Eliade and Graves and the great mythology that came in the century and the decades before his time, and his teachers, Robert Bly, Michael Meade, James Hillman. So he's connected in those lineages, but his thing that he wanted to bring forward was, look at all these tales of the deformed ones, of the different ones, of the outsiders, of the exiled. And how about celebrating them and celebrating the rat's way, the one who crawls under to get out, rather than the one who always flies on high? What about celebrating that deep, fertile darkness, not only the way the New Age will sometimes cast shining in the light, as if there is only righteousness in that direction. He was interested in repair and wholeness, in language, in image, in story, and in us.
Actually, I think it's very interesting what you just said there, because when you were talking about suddenly, in the new age circles, shall we call them, where dark characters are suddenly presented as being almost light characters. It's like a subversion of what they actually were. It's sanitizing to say that they are okay. And I'm thinking it's happening quite a lot, I think, in astrological circles, where they're taking images, and I think it's because they are female images that are dark images, and presenting them as great heroines. No, folks, sorry. They represent something that is dark within us, and yes, we need to embrace them as being a part of us, because we need to acknowledge that they exist and that they are there, but it doesn't mean that they are anything other than what they are. They
Well,
are, they are, in the same way that we are what we are.
yes, and the idea that anything needs to be lauded as the hero or the heroine is in itself askew, right? According to, I'm now in the lineage of Daniel Deardorff's teachings. So that is what I'm bringing you here, is this perspective. Not everyone has to agree, but that this perspective is that without the dark, we can't have the light, and vice versa, right? The light cannot really exist without the dark. It is only one half of the night. The moon is going to turn. We're going to see all of the phases of it. This is how we are constructed. So if we're going to look at wholeness, how do we honor all of the parts without necessarily needing to do the good and evil split, which is simplistic, or the right and wrong, which is in itself not whole, again, simplistic, because we are much more complex than that, right?
We
You
certainly
work with
are.
people on the level of psyche, and you must have to be helping people expand our capacity for complexity, which is a lot of what this book does. And I'd love to read a few things from it when we get a chance. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about this good bad problem, because yes, it's true, duality is a part of life, as is day night. The issue comes when we see it in, just as you said it, good and bad, because the hero is not always very heroic. If we look at ancient stories, heroes are flawed. No, anyone who reads Homer's Odyssey is going to look at Odysseus and is going to see that there are some very serious shortcomings there. It has to be the case, because otherwise there is no growth. And the reason why that that story speaks to us so many centuries later is because he is flawed and he is growing and he is learning. But equally, we can look at Greek mythology and see the character of, say, Eris, who caused a great deal of havoc leading to a Trojan War. And rather than portraying her as some great heroic person who's fighting for injustice, we can say actually she was really, really mad about injustice. And she is an agent provocateur. She's not pleasant. Please, let's not stop pretending that she's pleasant. She actually revels in the death and destruction that she sees around her in the war fields. That, you know, she is what she is, but she does perform a function. And I think that that's a much more real thing to say, and to see where we are Eris and where we are Odysseus. Neither is perfect. Both are flawed, and both have a function to play. So I think these are nuances that we need to. I don't know whether our ancestors were more attuned to nuances, but certainly right now we need to revisit nuance.
I agree completely. And there are some words that pop out that are in this book, and the book has an expanded glossary, so you don't have to read it with a dictionary next to you. Words like asynchrony, things that are not exactly the same on both sides. Multivalent or multivalent, one of Daniel's favorite words, of being able to have many, many perspectives that become whole. You know, the complexity and is celebrated here. And the idea that I'm kind of wondering, a lot of what you were just saying about the hero made me think about Gilgamesh and Enkidu. And there you have these two figures who fall madly in love with each other. That is like the light and the dark, the sun and the moon, you know, that is this brotherhood. And then this great grief of when Enkidu ends up having to leave the story. I don't want to tell everybody the story. I just want to say that that king, Gilgamesh, could not have found himself until he finds this other figure who is like the anti-hero. But in Daniel Deardorff's teachings, really more a trickster figure. You know, that it's not that the trickster figure is its own thing, its own kind of a deity, really. And it is not in comparison to a hero. You know, that, so to call something an anti-hero doesn't really work. It doesn't give full space. And like you're describing in the Odyssey, you have these characters who have agency to whatever degree they do, and can wreak havoc or bring goodness, or, you know, change history, change circumstance, often unwittingly by mistakes as well as by intention. And over again, we're shown our humanity. We're shown the different characters within ourselves. So when we're sitting around a fire and we're feeding the story after the story is told, which we do in Daniel's tradition and those from whom he learned about stories, you must give a chance for the story, a living being in and of itself, to be fed. And you feed it by saying, where did you find yourself in this story? Where did you fall asleep? Where did you get angry? Where did you want to argue with it? Where did you fall in love with it? Where did you get fixated on a particular image and lost the next 12 paragraphs of it, you know, or spaces? It's told out loud in the oral tradition, not off the page. But, you know, where did it strike you, in which part of your body? Some people will say in the feeding of a story, I became bereft there. I was in physical pain when I heard that. You know, that violent image reminded me of a childhood trauma. And now I'm faced with, how did they cope with it in the myth? Oh, there's might be some new perspective, some spaciousness, some holographic contextualizing and a new contextualizing. I know we're going way off into great paragraphs of our own conversation and nuance. I'm wondering, would you like me to talk a little bit about the other from Daniel's perspective?
Yes, I think that that would be good. I would just add one more thing though before we head in that direction, and that is if we're looking at day and night, and it is very easy to think about light, and traditionally cultures, we worship light, and light is obviously vital for life, but night has beauty within it, and it's the quiet of winter. It's the opportunity to dream, to let the mind wander, and therein lies the fear factor, because it's in those moments of darkness that we don't see clearly, that we feel blind and vulnerable. And I think that is the association then with darkness being something that is to be avoided and to be bad. It's there in all of our language, to shine a light on something. And there is an understandable, it's easy to understand how that evolves, but we throw out the beauty of the night at our peril, because we're back to civilized versus the inner world, which is the stuff of night, the inner feelings. And traditionally also is the difference between masculine and feminine energy. Nothing to do with what sex you are, folks. It's the nature of energy: masculine, outward, light, logic, reason, and then night. Feminine, to do with night and the inner world and imagination and the wild. And yes, sometimes it can get a bit hairy and out of control.
Well, it is out of control. It can get hairy and out of control if we're trying to control it. If we learn to dance with it, because it is an actual what it is made of is out of controlness. It is wild. It is not tamed. It is chaotic. Danny liked to talk about the chaosmos as well as the cosmos. Like, how far back do we go in the Big Bang? Like that. And what is this essence that and the physicists now know, and like people are finding out just how vast a black hole is or whatever, but also that's not nothing. There's something generative going on in all of these places, and the nature of abhors a vacuum kind of thing, that there's always going to be this equilibrium that is being sought. And so the pain points, I think, often come when we are trained in this way in civilized societies, and then we do it to ourselves, that we think perfection is what it's supposed to be, or only in the light, or how come I'm not always in a good mood, or what about this thing? Oh no, it's like depression. And what's been incredibly generative and deeply moving to me as we sit around the virtual fire on Zoom, and anybody who's watching this can get in touch with us, mythsingerlegacy@gmail.com, ask to be invited to a story night, and we will connect. The sitting around the fire has led to people not only feeding the story, but acknowledging their own heartbreak, their own struggles, the places where the stories helped them. And I have heard from at least half a dozen people now that they have said this book has saved their life and that they were on the verge of suicide. And I have continue to be deeply moved to know that. And I'm sure Daniel would be, and is, wherever he's listening, deeply moved to know this, that the power of illuminating from the dark and hidden places putting in its rightful central place the other, restoring an awareness and a belongingness in a certain way to otherness, but it always is trickster. So it's like it jumps into the center, it jumps out, it punches holes in civilization's wall and says, hey, let in the wild, let out the wild. You know, these are life-saving things if we can learn how to do them, right? For ourselves, you're a healer, you know, so it's like, what is this? And in a way, I think if I don't know a lot about astrology, though I'm a recipient of some very neat astrological thinkers for many years, it's those entities in the cosmos, the way the gravitational pulls are, all of the different kinds of factors are very akin to the gods, you know, that to this ancient way of seeing. I mean, some of them are directly aligned, like Mercury and Hermes, or, you know, but some of them are just in their essence, they operate, they pull on us that way, right? And that's the same way that I think these ancient realities are still there, whether we deny them or wake up to them. So I'm not even sure how long your time is with me. I hadn't asked you that in the beginning, but I would like to read a little. Can I read?
Let's hear what you've got there, because I'd
Okay.
like very much.
I want Daniel's voice to come in a little bit more. So this is called Raven Whispers and Forbidden Doors. And this is the beginning of the book. And this was not in the first edition. It was added in the second. And just for those of you who may already be familiar with this material, the third edition now includes new beforehand, a new foreword by Robert Simmons, the author of the Book of Stones and the Stones of the New Consciousness. Whoops. I'm going to say that again. Robert Simmons, the author of the Book of Stones and the Stones of the New Consciousness, and Martin Shaw, the mythologist, who I mentioned earlier, who is such a great writer as well as teacher and teller. And he wrote the afterword. So Daniel writes, denial is contagious, and facts are an addictive substitute for truth. All the fact-finding missions in the world cannot convince humankind to face this one troublesome secret. If only we gave credence to those half-heard whispers of the twin ravens who perch on our shoulders each morning. Imagine the difference in our world. Contrary mysteries, chattered in opposite ears, life and death, sun and moon, future and past, self and other, confusing the rational mind, but reaching and informing a wholehearted wisdom. A different world indeed. The fluent associativity, and he was an associative mythologist. He was interested in the leaping, not in the comparing. Right? The fluent associativity of such thought and memory, whispered to the heart by the voice of myth, has gone unheeded far too long. Neither dogma nor ethics nor rule of law can speak precisely to the unique depths of the individual person. Only myth, in its sweeping ability to constellate an array of contradictory meanings, has the power to awaken within the private and particular moment an immediate sense of what matters most. And he explains, there is the other, who stands at the margin within society and at once at the edge of consciousness within each individual. What we're talking about, right? The inner other. Even exiled to the edge of our own consciousness as the inner other. Still the inner other. The orphaned part of us that thrills to every story of the child lost to lowly circumstance, while unbeknownst to the false parents, the child is really the great wizard, the true king or queen, the secret champion waiting to rise from ignominy to a just and rightful destiny. Yet, many a noble soul does not rise. They live in permanent outsiderhood, the undesirable misfit, tolerated but never truly welcome. As the other within wanders through the forest of myth and the alleyways of empire, we may catch a sense of meaning and value, discovering that which matters most, hidden in the perennial human circumstance of otherness. Can I go on just a little further? Do we have time?
Just a little further, yes.
He says, from the perspective of civil society, that which is not proper or normal or accepted, and I would add from our conversation, or controllable, is deemed to evince a social or moral, and these are the words from the Oxford English Dictionary about other, disfigurement, ugliness, or crookedness. So Deardorff says, plants become weeds, animals become vermin, ideas become heresy and treason, and people become infidel, outcast, misbegotten. This deeming and damning perspective seems immovable, and yet many of the stories speak to a magical shift. And he goes on to tell the story of the Dame Ragnell in Arthurian legend, who was the ugliest hag ever, with a boar's snout and fangs, and yet she had the answer, what do women want? And Arthur needed to hear the answer, so he had to make a deal that Sir Gawain would actually agree to marry this horrible woman, just as a deal to get the answer, and the answer being sovereignty, which is what whole nations of people want, as well as women. We continue to want it, need it, and deserve it. So the blessing kiss, unfurls all of these things. The blessing kiss comes in all of these different forms. And as far as deformity, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off, but I just want to finish that one idea. The deformity part, the genius of deformity, the genius being something we have or that comes into us. It's not something we are. You don't become a genius. It's more like we have genius. If we're fortunate, we can find genius, we can ask for and invite it. And the genius of deformity is partly based on the idea from Gaston Bachelard, the French philosopher, of breaking form in order to liberate the imagination. So I wanted to come full circle to that point you
and absolutely beautiful. And the idea of sovereignty in our time is more important again than ever, as we discover that we have less sovereignty than we ever imagined. And that is not just women, that is also men. Men who are sent off to war, or have always been sent off to war, men who have been sent down into very awful, difficult work situations and got very little from it. Women and men coerced into systems which are abusive. So sovereignty is a very important word yet again. And we need to look to our stories to remind ourselves of who we are, that we could remember that we are sovereign. This is not about reclaiming sovereignty. It's about recognizing it within ourselves, because that is the means to freedom.
Yes, and we have to recognize that it is being taken from us in different ways. So there is a fight, there is a struggle, and it is in some ways of mythic proportions, at least on the emotional and spiritual level. We hope that it doesn't become of mythic proportions on the level of massive war any more than it already is on the verge of as we speak. And I would like to make sure that in speaking to that, there is one more passage that I really wanted to bring forward here about the othering of different peoples and the othering as well as parts of ourselves. And it's about tolerance and intolerance. Let me just see if I can find that passage. I hope I can. Yeah. So this is again the beauty of what Daniel Deardorff writes about in this book, is that he's never seeing only one side. He's always making sure the other side is being included. And that's the other within, and it's the other without. It's the personal other, it's the social other. As he lists, it's physiological otherness of different bodies, it's religious practices otherness, it's lineage otherness, it's cultural, it's sexual, it's etc. otherness, right? All of them. And there's so many stories in here that are about also being all of who we are, which has been one of my own things that I've been able to really embrace easily and carry forward, because it was already, he helped give me words, and the stories helped give me words for talking about being our full selves. So Daniel Deardorff writes, intolerance without breeds intolerance within. Social castigation on the one hand, and the shame of self-contempt on the other, make the ambivalent battleground of the other within. Here is the unremitting struggle, not to redeem or transform one's self-image in the mirror of malicious eyes, which is from a William Butler Yeats poem, The Dialogue of Self and Soul, that the way we are seen through malicious eyes, the ones who might be hating or judging us, yeah? So not to transform or try to redeem one's own self and self-image in that mirror of malicious eyes, but to reclaim and integrate all our negative and anomalous faces, the undomesticated, the stupid, the ugly, the deformed, the malignant, each arising to its singular orbit in the constellation of what we consider we are.
Well, that is a beautiful note on which to end. And I just want to remind everyone that the book that we are discussing is The Other Within, The Genius of Deformity in Myth, Culture, and Psyche by Daniel Deardorff. And I'll be putting a link to that in the description box. Judith-Kate, would you remind us of the website that people can go to if they want to find out more about this wonderful book and about what you're doing with it?
Sure. The publisher is Inner Traditions, so you can always go to their website or to your favorite bookseller because it's available. And our website for Daniel's work, and that includes all the story, the book, the myth-telling circles I described, and his music, is mythsingerlegacy.org. Or you can write to mythsingerlegacy@gmail.com to be added to our invitation list to events. You can also sign up on the website, and you can hear some of the music and see many of the videos and his teaching there, and get to see him, what he looked like. We haven't put a picture of him up on the screen, but you can go find it.
Wonderful. And again, I'll be putting a link to that in the description box. Judith-Kate, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for watching. Next time, we're looking at how to help ourselves be the best that we can be. Until then, goodbye.